Welcome to the Honest Mamas podcast, where we talk about the emotional and spiritual aspects of the motherhood journey. We are a team of honest mamas. Myself, Melissa, Sophie, and Claire. We are psychotherapists, moms, and friends. Join us as we get real about the topics that matter to you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 16 of the Honest Mamas podcast. Today, I had the privilege of speaking with Suzanne Lucas about the topic of pregnancy and body image. Suzanne is a photographer in Marin County, California, and teaches mindful photography classes. Suzanne is a delightful person. She is down to earth and so generous with her heart and wisdom. Personally, she has struggled and made peace with her own body image issues and has learned a great deal about how women relate to their bodies through her work as a photographer. What I love about today's conversation is that Suzanne shares personal experiences and insights that normalize and validate the struggles that can come up around body image while pregnant and during the postpartum period. She also offers some really practical, compassionate self-care tools to help navigate these challenging times. Here's my conversation with Suzanne. Let's get started. Hi, Suzanne. Welcome to the Honest Mamas podcast. It's great talking with you today.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Really appreciate it.
I'm really glad you're here. And the topic today is going to be struggling with body image during and after pregnancy. And this is a topic that I feel, very passionately about. And I'm curious if you can tell our listeners a little bit about what makes you interested in this topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably like a lot of women, I've been aware of that kind of negative self-talk that's been going on for the better part of my life. But when I did a yoga teacher training a couple years ago, for whatever reason, those voices just got louder and louder and stronger. And also as a portrait photographer, I saw over and over again how much women struggled with their bodies, especially after having children. And it became kind of a personal mission of mine to understand the roots of those things and how to transform them into language of more self-acceptance, not just for myself, but for all women.
Beautiful. I'm excited to talk to you then, just given, how this lives in you and how it's come about as a meaningful topic for you. I'm wondering if you can shed some light on just the pressures and the demands from society that pregnant and postpartum women face regarding their bodies. And I'm just curious if you have any insight through your own experience or working with women, how women can reclaim a sense of empowerment in our bodies during these times.
Right. Well, I'm certainly not an expert on this topic, and I really have my own experience to draw from. And for me personally, I loved being pregnant. I actually gained 50 pounds when I was pregnant. Mm-hmm. I had a size K breast. That is really a cup size. And I felt absolutely unapologetic about my size. And I almost felt like one of those fertility goddesses, those dolls that you see.
Yes.
And I know not all women feel that way, certainly. So, I want to acknowledge and respect that is not the case for everyone. But for me, it was. I really felt fabulous. And I noticed, too, like now, all these years after being pregnant, like that is so interesting that we lose that sense of empowerment just because there's not a baby inside of us, right? Like we are goddesses, all of us, regardless of our size and shape. And it's very interesting that it's kind of limited to perhaps just that moment in time.
Yeah, really good point. So I'm curious, with that just wonderful description of how you felt during the pregnancy. And I just have this fabulous visual of you just in this empowered, abundant state, this just how you felt after giving birth, if that experience followed you to the postpartum period or how things may have shifted for you.
Well, I think, immediately following pregnancy, I think I was just overwhelmed with having a healthy baby. I had lost my prior baby at 20 weeks. And I think just having a healthy baby, I was more focused on that for a while. It wasn't until years later, or maybe a year later, that I'm like really hard on myself because I haven't lost that last 20 pounds or whatever it is, or now I have this whole collection of stretch marks and my skin is different. My whole body has changed. And, I remember reading that somewhere in the stack of like pregnancy books, that my body will change, and maybe you're going to like it and maybe you won't, but it will change. And I think somewhere around maybe 9 months or a year afterwards, I really was realizing like, hey, my pre-pregnancy body is really not coming back. Like maybe I assumed that it was, and being starting a journey with being disappointed about that.
Right. Right. Well, I think you bring up a good point, because there is this expectation in our society that women will bounce back, like this term bounce back, or get to that pre-pregnant body, although like as though that's the ideal somehow. And there's this tremendous pressure, I feel, and I think a lot of women feel that to get back to that state, when in reality, I think for the majority of women, the body transforms and there's no real going back. And I hear that over and over again in women's experiences, just that the body's changed and it's transformed, and that there's often a cloak of negativity around that experience. I know for myself, my feet grew a whole size and have never gone back, and my rib cage, it's totally different now. It's way wider, and the idea that I somehow would fit back into those clothes that I wore before getting pregnant, it feels like an unrealistic expectation, but definitely that pressure was there to do it. And with that pressure came a lot of pain.
And a shaming too.
Yes,
right?
Yes. Good point.
There's a tremendous amount of shame in that I can't be or have the body that I once had, despite the fact if we saw anything else in nature or anything else in the world go through a massive transformation that the body goes through after carrying a child and bringing a child into the world, like we would not be as judgmental as we are to ourselves, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with you. So why are we? Why do we do that?
So when I think about where shame comes from, we could look at within our own lineage, within our own family structure, like what did our mothers and what did our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, what did they think about their bodies? And that could be a source. I also think certainly from a society, women historically have been always under the idea that they have to look a certain way, otherwise men won't like us or we're not going to be acceptable. So we have that other history going for us as well. And then obviously culturally, we all know like the distortion of media.
Yes.
And how we're supposed to look. So we have all these different sources. And I know for me, I thought about that a lot during this training I talked about, when I really became aware of this incredible negative self-talk. And in one way, it's helpful to know the source of this shame. And another way, it's also like, well, let's start by drawing a line in the sand now to stop that, because it is part of our history, whether it's in our family or from society. And how can we start to shift that?
Yes.
With us, right?
Yes.
So our daughters, whether it's our own daughters or the daughters of our friends or our family members, aren't exposed to that, or our great-granddaughters.
Yes. So I love that. I love the drawing the line in the sand, and regardless of what's been passed down to us, to make some conscious choices going forward to shift that perception around how women should look during pregnancy, and how we should be postpartum, and work towards striving for these unrealistic sizes of our body. So then how do we support women? how do we support ourselves? How do we support each other in returning to this experience, the experience of our bodies, really feeling the power of our bodies rather than being really caught up in the size or fitting into, pre-pregnancy bodies? How do we go about doing that?
Well, I think the first opportunity really comes in pregnancy. Mm-hmm. Like, it's an incredible time. Like, our bodies are growing a human being. Like, that in and of itself is so, so powerful. Mm-hmm. And it's an amazing opportunity to connect to the creativity and the power that we have, and also in the birthing process. So I feel like pregnant women have an incredible opportunity or an excuse, if you will, to take incredibly great care of themselves. You're growing a baby, for goodness sake. And this is a time to really pamper yourself, to use this time to take tremendous care of your body. Because obviously when that baby's born, you're about to give 1,000% of yourself. So on one hand, like, you're also banking all of this incredible self-care, love, and tenderness for yourself, because you're going to have to serve a baby, especially for a time being. At the same time, like, we as women, and especially as mothers, put self-care at the bottom of our to-do list. We'll take care of ourselves when everything else gets done. And of course, everything never gets done.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So developing rituals that help us reconnect to ourselves, that take care of ourselves in pregnancy, I think really set us up for success in motherhood. And we all have different ways of doing that. It could be going for a run, or a 5-minute meditation, or reading a book, or whatever it is, just to feel all of that energy kind of coming back into our own body. As mothers, as women, as mothers particularly, we're natural givers, and giving, and now the energy goes out. And what are the ways that we can invite that to come back in, whether it's 5 minutes or an hour, or a long weekend retreat.
Beautifully articulated. Right. I love that image of coming back, bringing that energy back so we can really sit more deeply in ourselves. I think that does invite us to experience our bodies more internally, right? And the experience of our bodies, and, rather than what they look like, or how other people are perceiving them, or the expectations put on them.
Exactly.
Great. So another question I have for you, Suzanne, is around pregnancy a little later on in life. I know women are choosing now to have babies and grow their families in their mid to late 30s, even into their 40s. I'm wondering around this topic of body image during pregnancy in our 40s, if there's anything that you want to say about that specifically. I know we both opted to have babies later on in life, and so it can be deeply personal here, this topic. So I'm curious about any thoughts you might have on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think especially going to the doctors, I sometimes felt like a geriatric patient.
Right.
The terminology that they use for being, I forgot what it is now, but anything over 35, like, we're in this sort of special handling zone. And I remember that really, like, kind of messing with my ego. Like, wait a minute, I feel so young, but on paper, to them, we seem so much older. So I think there's a special challenge there, just kind of maintaining our own vitality that we know in our body versus what we're being told outside of us, externally from a medical perspective. And then I think we have special challenges after 40. Our bodies go through other changes, and it's harder, I think, than, say, a 20-year-old or someone even in their early 30s who has a baby to return to anything like what we had before. So, I mean, it's possible, obviously, but for me, I felt like it was a real challenge. And then, of course, perimenopause for me wasn't that far after having my child, and that brings its own set of changes. So in hindsight, I realized, like, there's these waves of transformation in your body from pregnancy to postpartum to perimenopause, and it really begs us to surrender to the incredible changes that our bodies go through in this lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. Without much rest in between, right? I think I would have liked to have had a heads up on that one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think for me too, like I'm not that far from 50. And I think there's a point now that I look back and I say, wow, I have been struggling with body image my whole life. And it's time to make peace with that.
It's shivers.
Time to make peace.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to carry this around anymore. Yeah. It's time to let that go. And I won't have the perfect body, quote unquote, or what I want, but I can invite the peace and the acceptance in.
Wow. I'm loving that. I'm just letting it settle in myself too as an invitation. And I just really want to offer that to our listeners as well, because you said it so powerfully, and it evoked a lot of freedom in me when I heard it. That's a possibility for everyone, regardless of why we feel these pressures and how much we struggle with them. That there can come a time where we really land in that choice of wanting to let it go and deciding to let it go and put it down and not to carry it anymore.
Yes. Not just for ourselves, put down the weapons against ourselves and for our sisters out there, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Because we can be so hard on each other too, without really being super mindful of that. It's an unconscious kind of deep undertone that we're really judgmental of each other, and it really does need to stop.
I'm so glad you said that. Thank you for adding that piece. It's really important because we can help each other on this journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm curious, specifically you, I guess I'm really curious about as you land in this really empowered place of making peace, with body image and your relationship to your own body. Has this affected the way you talk about your body or other women's bodies around your child? And any advice or insight on how we can show up for our children in ways that set up more positive language and understanding of women's bodies?
Yes, of course. When you have a young child, they're not quite aware of these things. But now I have a 7-year-old, and he sees me getting undressed and dressed and has a lot of questions about my body. And like the other day, he's like, "Mom, your tummy's so dirty." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, he was seeing all my stretch marks. And I'm like, "No, these are stretch marks, and this is what happens when you have a baby. When you were in here, these are from you." And I wouldn't trade it for anything. Trade it for anything because I got you. And I think if I hadn't done all that work on myself to accept how I felt about my body, that would have come across as shame or embarrassment. And even though I wouldn't have said the words, he would have felt it.
Yes.
And boy or girl, I don't think it matters. Like those are the kinds of things where we have to just stop passing that along, get it out of our mind stream. Right. Yeah. And that's why it really does start with us. And being pregnant, that is a fabulous time to start being aware of that negative self-criticism so that you can put it into practice. So when your children are old enough to ask these questions, to notice how you treat yourself, what you think about yourself, that it's kind of already been nurtured and cared for in oneself.
I really like that. This idea of nurturing and caring for yourself when you start to notice the negative self-talk that comes up. And that's a practice. So, even when the negative self-talk comes up, it's an opportunity to practice and practice and practice coming back to kindness for ourselves and our bodies. And after the practice, the reward is as well that you can really have a shifted energy internally when you're talking with your children about your body, their bodies. There's a shift that happens. Yeah.
And just to say, just to add on to the practice thing, I think in our culture specifically, we have this idea that if I do this meditation workshop or I read this book, I go to this workshop, then suddenly I'm going to love my body. And especially for someone like myself who really was really in touch with a lot of self-hatred, it took years before I could really even start to see some level of self-acceptance. And it's this ongoing practice where I'd have this thoughts surface and to really see them for what they were and not get lost in the story. And at the same time, inviting more tenderness and kindness towards myself.
I almost imagine that's the advice you might give to the younger version of yourself going through it. Yeah. And I think about that too, like just returning to that kindness and compassion and knowing that it's a journey. It may take some time, and to have patience
exactly.
with that. Yeah.
You know, we often would never talk to our child the way that we talk to ourselves, right? So we can extend that same kind of kindness, like to ourselves as if we were that child, like, oh, honey, like, easy now.
Right. Easy with the self-criticism there, right? Yeah. It's very gentle and kind. I love it. Well, Suzanne, this has just been a real delight for me to talk to you today. And I really want to thank you for, sharing your thoughts and your wisdom with us and joining us on the podcast today. And I really look forward to having future conversations with you on many more topics.
Thank you so much, Sophie. I really love what you and Honest Mamas are up to. And I'm just so excited for you and so proud of everything that's happening.
Thank you. We'll talk again soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. My conversation with Suzanne reconfirmed for me how awe-inspiring and magnificent women's bodies are in the creation of life. Even though many women may not feel this way, it is certainly my hope that more and more women begin to unapologetically experience their power and creativity during this time, rather than diminish their value by being critical of their bodies. I hope this conversation will inspire women to develop self-compassionate attitudes when faced with pervasive social messages around how their bodies should look during pregnancy and the postpartum period. To get our show notes and more information, go to www.honestmamas.com/episode 16. Also join our community on Facebook by going to www.facebook.com/Honest Mamas Community, where these conversations will surely continue.